Imagine knowing exactly what your students are learning and exactly which steps you need to take next.
Join us in Down with the Reading Quiz to craft meaningful and productive formative assessments that move away from gotcha moments of basic recall and toward assessing what your students actually can do.
In this 30-minute free masterclass, we'll share 3 powerful assessment keys that work for any novel at any time of the year.
Head to shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to sign up, and we'll also send you a free workbook to keep track of all your notes.
Once again, that's shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to nail formative assessments forever.
Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, and welcome to an episode in our series on independent reading. So I'm Marie, in case sorry, I probably should have said that in the first place. I had the fantastic opportunity to catch up with a friend of mine and a friend of the podcast, Dr. Jenna Copper. Jenna is one of the first teachers who I really met through like teacher social media. And it was just one of those moments of like, oh, yes, we are going to be friends. Jenna is absolutely amazing. She and I got to chit chat about both of our favorite subjects, but you'll hear, especially through like just the excitement and passion in Jenna's voice, how much she loves to talk about independent reading and student choice when it comes to reading, especially. One of the first things that we connected on, the two of us, was our joy that we get out of reading like YA fantasy books and being able to share that type of joy of reading with our students in ways that often, an English teacher that talks about reading kind of fluffy, like fantasy, YA fantasy at that, makes your high school students go, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to just read Charles Dickens? Like that's it. And so it's just kind of a funny little touch point that the two of us both have. And we talk in our conversation about a lot of the development of some very cool ways to position units within your curriculum, how to approach students with choice, because that in and of itself, anybody that has given students choice before, or if you listen to our rerun episode last week where Amanda and I talked through the pitfalls and the benefits of choice in the classroom and that just kind of like the best practices for that, Jenna has experienced all of the same things. So approaching students with choice strategically and in a way that is controlled and is still very productive is very much part of our conversation. And then just some like great ideas. If you don't already know Jenna, I have her bio up from her website because like who better than herself to let us know like where she is coming from and her experience that has brought her here. When I met Jenna, she was a high school teacher, full-time high school teacher, and she has now, with 2 kids, she now has 3 kids and has moved into the teacher prep program. She's a professor at a college that is in her hometown. And so she gets to work in high school classrooms, but with prospective teachers. So how stinking cool is that? And I think one of the coolest things about Jenna is that when she first met with, like it says on her website, during my first meeting with the director of my doctoral program, he asked me why I wanted to pursue my PhD. My answer was easy. I want to research. And so through the experience of researching and teaching full-time all at the same time and having her first baby and getting married, like all of these big life events were happening, she was able to find her passion, which was sharing the educational research she conducted in her classroom and sharing it with educators all over the world. She has published in many different journals and textbooks, presented at conferences like NCTE, CITE, and PCTELA. She is one of the founding members and one of the 4 members that makes up the Keeping the Wonder workshop and Keeping the Wonder group. We have had all 4 of those ladies on the podcast before and had a wonderful conversation when they published their book and released their book about keeping the wonder in the classroom. And so this conversation is going to come as no surprise that it's full of ideas, full of passion, full of excitement. And I'm very excited for you all to hear us talk about choice, about independent reading, and about all that goes along with it. So enjoy and cue the music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. All right, everybody. I would like to give a big, huge, warm, Brave New Teaching welcome to Dr. Jenna Copper. Welcome back, Jenna.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today talking about one of my favorite topics, actually.
You were the first name actually that came to my mind when Amanda and I were talking about okay, let's do a whole independent reading, choice reading series, because we've been doing some series on the podcast and it's been nice because we can take big teaching topics, especially ELA topics, and chunk them up into different parts. And when we were talking about who of our friends can we talk to? And I was like, well, Jenna, obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, good, because this is an easy one for me. This is one of my favorites. I'm very passionate about this topic. So yes.
There's some of the ones, this is one of the ones that you can just talk without even having to really think about it. You don't have to go back through your Google Drive. It's all right there because it is so fun. So before we jump into independent reading, I gave a little bit of a bio of you and just the amazingness that is you in the intro. But would you just introduce yourself for anybody who might not be super familiar with you, your teaching journey and kind of where you're at today?
Sure. So hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Jenna Copper, and I was a high school English teacher for 13 years. Last year, I had a lot of really big changes happen in my life. I had my third and final baby. It is, yes, he's our final. And so I was on maternity leave and had a really surprising opportunity to make a transition from teaching high school to teaching education courses at a local college. And truly, I wasn't really prepared to make that big jump, but tenure track positions in education, specifically focusing in literacy, don't really come up that often. And this position actually ended up being within walking distance to my house. So I made the transition at the beginning of this school year, and I am absolutely loving it. I teach future teachers, and I get to teach some writing courses and some foundational reading courses. And I'm really, really loving this new position. So this topic today is actually something that is very important to me because it's not just my experience as a high school English teacher that this topic is relevant to, but also something that I am now passing on to my future teacher students. So I'm really happy to be able to talk about it on both ends, really.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. And I think it's so fascinating. We were talking a little bit before we started recording just about it's kind of bleak. Not completely bleak, but I feel like if I was 19, 20 years old and looking at becoming a teacher now in this world, things look very different than they did when I was actually 19, 20 years old. And so I feel like having somebody like you who is a veteran classroom teacher who has done, you've got your doctorate, right? You're obviously knowledgeable in your field and in practice, but then also you've got a good balance of we're not talking toxic positivity here. It's not everything's great and you just mold minds and change. Everything's wonderful. It's teaching's really hard. And so to have someone like you as a teacher and a mentor for our new teachers, I think is just so amazing to find.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, it's definitely important to have a healthy dose of reality. And that's something that is really important to me in my new position, that in the secondary classroom, like I was for all of those years, still maintaining those connections and maintaining those ties so that I am still, having that grasp on what it currently is like. And I'm fortunate because my husband is also a teacher. My brother and sister-in-law are also educators. And I have many friends at our local high school. So I've been able to get in and do some observations, do some collaborations with them.
Oh, that's
so I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. But I have just found that is so, so important when working with pre-service teachers, to be able to talk about your past experience as a teacher, but also to be able to say, currently, that I know what you're going through and this is the reality of it. And we're going to prepare you for the reality of it. And that's been really important.
Yeah, prepare you for the reality with like eyes wide open, and like on the flip side of that coin, not diving into that negative spiral that happens a lot on social media, especially. Amanda and I talked about it. Oh gosh, I think it was like last season on the podcast. We were talking about TikTok. And I was like, I don't know that I would make it if this is the example that I would look at, because there cannot be only the two extremes, right? There cannot be only that everything's great and shiny and wonderful, but also everything's terrible, leave the profession. Like that can't.
Right. That's actually something we were just talking about in some of our faculty meetings this past semester, but it's really, really important for us. And we're building in as much real teaching, like in the classroom practice as we can. Even more, way more than what I had. I
know.
think I had one field class where I went like once a week for 6 weeks, and then student teaching. And so it's really important for us to build in those hours. It's a requirement for the state of Pennsylvania. It varies for, different states, but giving them a variety of different experiences in the actual classroom. And so we're building in these experiences at the very, very beginning of really their education major. And that is definitely, we've seen that has definitely helped them see the balance between everything's rosy and everything's terrible. They're really, they're experiencing the reality of it while they're still in the safe space in college where they can work through some of these issues.
While they're still kind of kids themselves. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And really one of the biggest questions that I get over and over again is about motivation for reading. How can we compete with cell phones? I mean, cell phones are also the big classroom management topic. I also teach a course on classroom management. That's the big topic. And when I'm in my reading and writing classes, the other big question that's related to that is, how can we compete with this amazing device that's in their hands? How can we make it engaging? How can we get them to read? So
we'll look at you with the segue. Yes. Let's just jump into it then, shall we? I mean, well, and one of the things actually that you and I first connected on, like truly when we met in person, was you turned to me. I don't know if you remember this. We were in an elevator and you were like, I'm reading a book right now. It's called A Court of Thorns and Roses, and it's so good. And I was like, oh, really? And I like just finished, I want to say like Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. Mm-hmm. And so I was like all in my feels. Yeah. And then I picked up this book and I was like, oh, it's so good. Yes. So reading is something that I was like, well, we're meant to be friends.
It's so funny that you bring that up because yes, I do remember that. And it was so important to me too, that book in particular.
Yes.
Because I didn't realize that my favorite genre for choice reading is fantasy romance. And I am not ashamed to say it.
Same.
Right. And I have since then really have stuck to my genre pretty closely because it's what brings me joy. And so I feel like that was a really big turning point for me personally, which then I was able to be honest and bring it to the classroom and explain myself as well.
Right. Well, and explain to my students, which I'm doing, like, I can't actually tell you that you should read this until you are in your adulthood and out of your parents' house. But like, I like it because I have my own mortgage. It's like
the good thing. Yeah, exactly. And once you start reading in a certain genre and you are pretty versed in the genre, you can find classroom acceptable, related topics that, books that students might enjoy within that genre that would be more appropriate because Court of Thorns and Roses is definitely, it's definitely explicit. Not one without a parent signature. So,
well, oh my God. Even still, like, I don't want to like have the conversation of like, why do you need my signature for this? Like, nope.
Same here. Same
graphic.
Yes. Right.
So let's jump in. Actually, whenever we start on the podcast talking about like a topic like independent reading, Amanda and I have found many times that we have to define what it is so that we're both talking about the same thing.
I understand that.
Like we do it all the time. We're like, oh, wait, that's not what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? And some of it comes from being from different parts of the country and just having different edubabble terms for things. And then also just each of us being in our own universes and like thinking we're explaining things that we're not explaining. So would you explain when you think of independent reading, what is it like? What does it look like in your classroom? What is the practice of independent reading within your curriculum?
Sure. So at its foundation, what I think of when I think of independent reading is really choice and voice. So students have a choice in what they want to read, how they're going to engage with it, and their voice comes through in the way that they analyze it and the way that they interpret it. So it can look very different depending on the class, but essentially there's two ways that it sort of evolved in my classroom. I started with just a replacement of a traditional whole class novel unit and decided I'm just going to experiment with, instead of we're all going to read the same book, we're going to do a unit. We're going to have the same objectives. I'm very passionate about backwards design. So I always start with the goal. What's the main goal related to standards? Specifically, I'm in Pennsylvania, so our PA Common Core standards, and then some form of essential question. That could be universal for a whole choice novel unit, whole choice meaning the whole class reads the same novel at once, or a choice novel unit. So I took that basic idea and I just decided, instead of forcing them to explore this essential question with the same novel that we've done in the past, I'm going to give them a choice. And I started off slowly. I gave them a choice of 5 different selections that I had read. That's where I felt the most comfortable. And we did activities that all students could engage in, no matter what book they were reading. So I sort of created a novel study that was universal enough that it would engage them in some of these important topics to have them answer that essential question. And I realized over time, though, that I didn't actually need to read the book in order to ensure that they were on the right track and achieving the goals. And so after a few years, I started giving them more choice within some constraints. So they had to do a proposal and I had to approve the book. And it had to be something that was accessible in our school library. And that was based on some of the rules of our school district, essentially. And
sure. No, that makes sense.
Right. It made it easier to facilitate.
Yeah, and it makes it more equitable, like where you're not like, absolutely. Well, you can have anything if you can get it, which I've found,
right.
I thought I was being great. Like, well, if you can get your hands on it, yeah, great. We've got this great library. We've got the and then I was like, actually, I'm really cheating kids who can't get that.
Who can't get that, right.
Yeah, I just didn't even realize. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so that was sort of how we started it. And I was very fortunate to have a supportive librarian and media specialist who we really did have a great selection of books. So that made it doable. And I started collecting books in my own classroom as well that were part of that whole approval process. And it eventually turned into, essentially within those constraints, I should say, it turned into a full choice project. I also did something similar then when I realized what success we had, the buy-in. I mean, really one of the goals of the project was just that students left high school having read one book that they really, really liked. So I kind of viewed it as an exploration into genre, because that's what I couldn't believe that I was an English literature major. That was my undergrad degree. And I had never realized, after all, I mean, I was an avid reader my whole life. I just had never found the genre that I'm like so passionate about now in fantasy romance, which
I know. I say it with the same kind of like giggle at the back of my throat, but I freaking love it. Like,
I love it. I love it. It's my favorite. And I've read so many great books.
Yes.
I've found so many great authors. And so I share that with students, and the whole point really meet those goals and essential questions. And then in addition to that they've get to read something that they enjoy. And I actually took that same idea and concept, because it was so successful, and brought it to my AP Literature and Composition class. The only stipulation there was that I asked them to choose a book from it's sort of a suggested reading list from AP. I think it's actually
from a College Board, right?
Yes, from College Board.
Yeah.
There are some unofficial ones as well that people have done. They've compiled like works that have commonly showed up on the open-ended literary argument essay. But it's a huge list. And so
it's
even
humongous.
With that, yes, exactly. There's still a large list to choose from. And we had so much success with it. So I have been such an advocate of it since then. And for me, it's really been sort of in replacement of the traditional whole class novel unit. And that's not that I am anti at all, because I'm not. I love whole class dramas. I love doing a Shakespearean play, a tragedy. I used to love doing The Crucible, An Enemy of the People. I love plays because they lend themselves to more of that interaction.
Oh, totally.
Sure,
you're preaching to the choir over here. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I love a whole class work. It is definitely not that at all. But I've just found so much success with the choice reading unit that it didn't make sense to go back.
Same. In a lot of ways, same. I've found teaching younger kids, I do more like all class and then choice to kind of like train them and then get moving. I have a few questions. First of all, when you were teaching, you were on semesters, right?
I am on semesters now, but I was on like 4 quarters when I
you were on quarters before. Okay.
Yes.
How long in your estimation, how long was your average like choice unit or just novel unit in general? I guess it doesn't matter one way or the other.
Yeah, I would say that in general, it was about 4 weeks. So 3 weeks to read the book and engage in those activities to prepare them for the final assessment. And the final assessment was my absolute favorite part of it. So we did that for about a week at the end. And it was what I like to call it a creative thinking project. But essentially, just like at the beginning, when they made a proposal for their book, they wrote a proposal for some form of a product to teach us about an important factor of the book. And so they were just so creative. I mean, all sorts of different types of projects, from hands-on projects to writing projects, some video projects. I've had students use technology, students that didn't. It was a whole variety of things. And it was a really good indication if a student, number one, read the book, which I was a little worried about that to begin with. How am I going to assess, did they actually read the book? Turns out I didn't really need reading check quizzes to figure it out. If they couldn't talk about it, they definitely weren't caught up. So it was a good internal motivator that way. But it also told me if they liked it, because the passion that they had for these projects afterwards was phenomenal. And I do have to say, because we were talking about reality in the beginning, that is not to say that every single student came up with the most engaging, exciting project ever. But by and large, it was very successful in their assessment of it afterwards. So it's something that I would always ask them about afterwards. They would tell students incoming for the next year, oh, just wait till you do the creative thinking project.
That's so cool.
So there were other qualitative indicators
that
said it was successful too.
So talking about your parameters, I'm assuming because I've tried this out a couple different ways, there are different approaches. Did you do a genre approach? Did you do a time written approach? What were the parameters that you ended up when you saw the most success? What were the parameters that you gave kiddos for choosing their novels?
Yeah, so I think this is a good point to add that I was teaching seniors with the first choice reading project, and then with my AP Lit class, it was a combination of highly motivated 11th and 12th graders. So I want to make sure that I say that, because there are definitely other stipulations and parameters that I would give depending on the class. So,
totally. Well, and there's different scaffolding needed depending on the level and the education needs and all that. Absolutely. Yes. But good to note. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So the first thing is that this project was our last major unit of the year. And there's so many different ways that you could make this work in your classroom. And I'm just going to give you mine as an example so you can kind of see for our listeners how it worked for me. So I chose, like you said, to make sure that we had just about an entire school year's worth of practice with close reading and literary analysis. So by the time that we got to the end of the school year, they were very good with their skills in these concepts, just this close reading analysis, literary. So I don't want to necessarily say literary theory, but using multiple perspectives to.
But they
engage
had
in
the
work.
tools, right?
Exactly.
They were equipped with the tools, and they to go with the tool metaphor. They were all sharpened, and all the batteries were charged. Yes. Totally.
So in my English 12 class, the way that our curriculum was set up, it was a survey study. So we started from Beowulf and worked our way up to the modern era. So what I like to do then was for the last big unit of the year, we did our choice reading unit, and a stipulation was that it had to, number one, be of literary merit. And
yes.
number two, and of course, I stole that from the AP College Board language.
But it works.
It works. And then the second stipulation was that we wanted it to be something that was modern, because we finally entered the modern period. And that gave me enough leeway that I could kind of guide them in the right direction, with also giving me the opportunity to veto if it wasn't necessarily something that we could find literary merit in. So I did have to do a lot of work up front with them to engage in sort of a reading inventory, one-on-one conferencing, small group conferencing, to help them figure out what would be an appropriate book for them.
Yeah.
We always start with the end in mind, that this is the project you have to do. So we need to pick something of literary merit that you're going to be able to accomplish this project.
Sure.
While at the same time, I should say, I guess the third stipulation was, if they hated the book, they had to find something else.
Yeah.
So we built in some class time that they, had an opportunity to choose, but I actually let them choose any genre within those stipulations.
Okay.
I had some students that chose graphic novels, some that chose young adult, some chose classic works, some chose nonfiction. And so we kind of, and that's where we got by the end, that's where we ended up. And it, like I said, we had to sort of explore our way through it. But just as an example, though, of something else that we've done, was that choice does not have to be all or nothing. And I think that's the big thing that I want to make sure that I explain, that we worked up to it. But that doesn't mean that when I was giving them a choice between 4 or 5 books, that wasn't choice. That was still choice. And that was
totally. Yeah.
Absolutely a step in the right direction. I did another project with my AP Lit class once where they got to choose from a list of 2 or 3 books, and we did literature circles. That's still choice. And that's still giving them the opportunity for independent reading. So that's sort of the way that it worked in my classroom. I know that when we go all the way back to the definition of independent reading, obviously we are, including some form of choice in there, and to some degree incentivizing that choice. But I like to think that the big goal is just creating these lifelong learners who will eventually want to pick up a book on their own. And that's really the goal, is to actually become an independent reader.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, and just to help our students pick up the love for stories.
Yes.
Whether
absolutely.
they are fictional stories or true life, current, historical, whatever, but just that empathy building goodness that is learning stories and hearing stories and enjoying stories and all of it, right? I think that's what we get out of it. That's the point. That's why we learn to read, write, listen, and speak. Yeah.
Yes.
No, absolutely. So, okay. You're getting me really excited for the choice unit that I actually have coming up. We just did a book tasting with my 12th grade ethnic lit class.
So much fun.
It's a finite choice one, because then in the second quarter they get the training wheels are off. Yes, but it's that lead up. Yes. So there's a list of them, and then students go through and they choose, and then we do exactly what you're talking about, the whole same questions, same activities, and then it just applies to their books, and it puts so much of the onus on kids. It's wonderful. It's
so great. I love it.
I have a whole master class where I talk through how I put it all together, because it's just such a game changer in the classroom.
Yes, I love that.
I want to flip the script a little bit. What is a story you have of when choice or independent reading has one of your best lesson learned moments? When has it gone real poorly and you were like, okay, all right?
Oh, well, where do I begin with that one?
I know, right? That's how you know you're a real classroom teacher. You're like, well, which one?
So at the very beginning, when I was exploring this concept, I first read the book Reading in the Wild by Donna Lynn Miller. And it was just so inspiring. It connected with me on so many levels. And that was really one of the first ways that I started thinking that it was possible to do something different. So I sort of had this, rosy approach to it and was trying to work within the bounds of how many students I had and how many class sets of novels that we had.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave students a choice between, I want to say, I know for certain that Gulliver's Travels was one of the choices.
Uh-huh.
Jane Eyre was one of the choices. And remember, this is British literature. So what was the other one? Heart of Darkness.
Oh, okay.
So just guess. I don't know if you can picture this in your mind, if you've seen these books before.
Oh, yeah.
But Jane Eyre is very long. Gulliver's Travels is not a hard read, but it's long.
Right.
Just guess how many students chose the teeny tiny 95-page Heart of Darkness, which is absolutely the most challenging.
Oh, yeah.
book. I think probably in our curriculum, it was one of the most challenging to understand. So I realized at that first try that I needed to do a better job of some sort of introduction to these books or choose these books where we weren't just picking them on page numbers.
Well, because that's right. Red-blooded kids, right? They're going to look at it and be like, that's my number. Yes.
And I was not mad at them at all.
No, they're kids, right?
You get it, right? You totally get it. And it was definitely something that was easily remedied once I realized oh goodness, I realized my error right away.
Right.
But it only really took I read the first page of each book to them, sort of like a first chapter Friday.
Almost like a first chapter. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the Heart of Darkness had it starts off with a sentence that's 28 lines long or something, really, really
No,
wild.
I think, yeah.
It's very complex. And then obviously, I just realized that I did need to keep, since we were all reading within the same time period, and I would have students divide the book up by reading checkpoints.
Sure. Yeah.
That I needed to try to keep in mind if we were going to be reading one of 5 books or whatever, that there had to be some form of equity for how long it was, in addition to how fast of a read it was.
And complexity. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. You can actually find a lot of that information on Goodreads.
Totally. Yes.
People who review these, yes.
One of my favorite stops along the way when I'm putting together, because I do a lot more finite lists. I think you might be inspiring me to totally open it up, maybe even for sophomores. I don't know. We'll see. More on that to come, friends. Yes. But yeah, I've run into the same pitfalls where I've been okay, so that one choice that I put on there as I'm going to steer a few kids who maybe have some high need IEPs towards that. And then all of a sudden I'm all out of copies of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I'm well, it's actually a little low for you guys and it's long and dense. So I don't know what you were thinking, but it's not the same as the movie. Okay.
Right. And I think too that there is obviously part of this is that we want them to find something that they're interested in.
Yes.
And it's really easy to just focus on that and not also keep in mind that they're kids. And so they're going to try to find the shortest book that they can.
They're kids with jobs, with families, with sports, with arts, right? They very much, I think ideally they want to be yes. Most kids want to find something that they're interested in. And then reality sets in and they go home that night and they're actually, I was talking to my friends, and then time is gone and they're can I switch to the novella? Yeah.
And I'm also a big advocate for homework with a purpose. And that's it.
Yes.
And especially that's one of those things that I have really evolved on in looking into more equitable teaching practices and assessment practices, but also just as a mom and having a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, just like you, Marie, and realizing hey, these kids have a lot of things going on out of school. Yeah. So when attempting to create this project, whether you're giving them full choice, or you are having them choose from a selection of different novel topics or choices, that we really need to keep in mind that they do have to have this read within a certain time period. And so give them as much time as you can in class, but also guide them to like, hey, we want you to enjoy something, but you probably shouldn't pick 1,000-page book because this is a 3 to 4 week project. So,
Well,
so that also matters.
But it's also a great opportunity as their teacher to give them really pragmatic life skills of like,
Absolutely.
I love reading at night, and I would be known to read until 2:00 in the morning, but I still have to wake up at 5 to get ready, to get my kids ready to go to school the next day. So like maybe, we're just kind of teaching them time management. We're teaching them how to balance. Because I love when kids get so into their book. Remember when One of Us is Lying came out? Like that. Remember how like kids ate that book up. I found myself having to say, we have to put our books down so that we can do class. And if I can get through all of this together, we can do this, then we can keep reading. But like, it's that balance piece of, I'm so glad you love this. That's #goals. What you're doing right now, kid. And also we have other responsibilities within class, and then we can get back to our books.
100%. And I think too, one of the other big aspects of this that I haven't mentioned yet is that modeling is huge. So modeling like a think aloud thought process of what I would choose and why I would choose it and the things that I would think about. And then when they read, this is a question I get a lot. So if they're just reading in class, like, what are you doing? And the answer is, I'm reading. I'm going to read too. I'm going to model that we're reading together. Obviously, if a student needs something or you conference, it's a great time to be able to do that. But if you're doing a silent sustained reading, why not just have that, just read with them and model like, I'm interested too. So I think that it's modeling on a number of levels.
Well, and it's also, and that is hard. Like, so that part is very, very hard because you see like, oh gosh, I saw that email come in. I could get those quizzes graded really fast. I could plan for tomorrow. It seems like free time. But if more often than not, we are modeling what we want them to be doing, which is prioritizing this, which is the act of reading in that moment, right? Like they have other things that are going on as well. So again, we're like modeling those life skills above all else. It is hard though.
It is really hard, especially as somebody who's good at multitasking.
Well, yeah. And like my brain goes pew, 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 pew. And I'm like, oh my God, I could have gotten so many check marks on my to-do list.
I'm like, I'm just gonna, I know, right. Because if they're engaged and most of them are, engaged in reading, but I have really noticed that it makes a difference. When they see me sitting at the front, reading along with them. And then when you put it down, I noticed they start putting them down too. Okay, it must be our time's over. Right. So it definitely has an effect, but you're right. It is hard.
They look for those social cues. Well, and I found that they're more apt to talk to me about their books because they're going to ask me about my book, right? Like they'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're doing it too," even though they know that I read because I tell them how late I'm up each night reading. We talk about it first thing in class. Like I was only up until 10 last night, and they're like, "Wow, you must have been tired." But they will talk to me more about what they're reading if they see me doing the act of reading. It all just. Like when we talk about it, it makes sense. But again, in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something hard. Too. I love those conversations.
They're the best.
So great because it was like, I saw it from a very unique angle because my husband, who also taught at the same school district that I did, he is a very big reader, but we have very different genres.
Yeah.
So I was
he's not reading Sarah J. Maas, A Court of Thorns and Roses?
He is
interesting.
No, he's not at all. He wouldn't even know like what a romance novel is like that.
Right. Yeah. He'd be like, for why?
Exactly. At the same time, it's great because he does a lot of book talks with students where he'll just tell them like what he's reading and how it's relevant to the class. Mm-hmm. Well, he teaches government. So he's reading a lot he teaches U.S. history and U.S. government. So, what he's reading to me, I find it very interesting. I just wouldn't want to take the time to read it,
It would be a more interesting documentary or like episode of 60 Minutes. Yeah. Yes.
I'm going to be honest. I feel like I have the best of both worlds because he'll tell me about it and I find it super engaging and I don't even have to read it. But I'm not going to read like an 800-page book about a president when I'm just more I just love the genre that I love. And same thing goes for him. He would not want to read what I read.
Sure.
And so it's a really good lesson for them, because I think that approaching it from the perspective of like, well, here's how I'm thinking about it. I'm not just this English teacher that is forcing you to read. No, this is my experience too. That it goes a long way. It really does.
It does. It does. And it helps with relationship. I mean, it helps with all of that classroom
100%.
management stuff too, because it makes us people to them in more ways than like, we're just a grown up who knows everything. Yeah,
exactly.
Oh, absolutely. I think we have time for like one more question.
Sure.
You started talking about like conferencing with kids and the activities that you do at the beginning to help them find something that they like. What is one of your favorite activities to help students choose a book, or to help them even know where to start? Because that's where they get is lost. Yes.
They do. Yeah.
Yes.
I love an activity called a book buffet. So it is similar to a book tasting, but basically what I do is I will actually bring in artifacts from the book and put them in. I get those cheap tins. We usually like have them at our house. Those cheap tins from the dollar store that you would use at like a barbecue.
Oh, like the roasting tin things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll put artifacts from the book, or from different books. I mean, that's the goal here if we're doing, some sort of choice or independent reading project. And I'll put different artifacts for the books, and then I'll have the books kind of spread out around the room, and students come up and they take artifacts off of the book buffet and they bring them back to their seat, and they just start engaging in discussions with the people sitting around them. What do you think this artifact means? How do you think it relates to this book? And so it's just a variation of a book tasting. And it's just something that I've noticed starts them off on the right foot, that this is something different. It's novel. It's, what we call from Keeping the Wonder, a flashbulb activity. So it's something that is, that they're going to remember, that's going to get them excited about the unit. And I'm telling you, that worked with seventh graders. It's worked with my seniors, and I do the same thing with my college students. They love it too. So it's just one of those activities where you are getting them to engage with the blurbs of the book, some of the important characters, some of the important symbols, so they can start to see what they might actually be interested in, which books look the most fascinating to them. And it gives you an opportunity to talk to them. As they're doing this activity, you are part of the party. You're part of the barbecue. So you're going to walk around with them, walk around, and you're going to chit chat and talk about it too. And so that's like one of my absolute favorite activities to do. It works really, really well if you have a selection of books that you're going to have them choose from. But there's also lots of ways to do it with just any sort of, choice project, genre-wise, character-wise.
Yeah.
And then you start to get ideas for what students are interested in and what they like.
Yeah, you can kind of follow what they're picking up and what they're picking up on as they're like grabbing things around the room.
Absolutely. And honestly, that is like one extreme. This is like one thing we absolutely preach with Keeping the Wonder. And for those of you who don't know, Keeping the Wonder, it is the workshop that I am 1/4 of a member of. And our mission is really to just engage students in meaningful activities that support wonder, that support, interest in school, and support these emotional skills that are just so important right now. So one end of it, of course, is like this big project that we did, but I'm going to be honest, you don't always have time for that. It just,
or
you're
energy.
always going to have it.
Yeah.
And there's truly another wonderful activity is just to simply give them a reading interest survey. You can do it on Google Docs. You can do it on paper. You give it to them. You let them think about it. They fill it out, and then you talk to them. So it's basically the same concept as the book buffet, just without all the bells and whistles. And hey, if you have the time and energy to do it, go for the big show. If not, the other one works too.
Well, it gives you, both of them give you an entry point for conversation.
Absolutely. That's the point.
Like, I feel like anybody who has spent about 10 minutes in a classroom has either experienced firsthand or seen a very pulling teeth conversation with a student.
Completely.
And both of the things that you've just said, like both the bells and whistles and a Google form, give you an entry point and something to lean on when starting a conversation with the most reluctant kid there is.
Absolutely.
Because they're like super out there. I mean, the raw kids, which is you and me, we're going to be like, I also like to we're going to be like, and also I like glitter, and also rainbows are cool. Like we're just going to be in it versus the kid that is not a reader in any way, shape, or form because they have told themselves that they hate it. They're going to be harder to get engaged, and this just gives you a way to get them going. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's students who are self-proclaimed, I hate reading, that kind of thing. You absolutely can make these connections with other things that they like, other interests. So when I say reading interest survey, it's more of just an interest survey.
Interest, I know. Well, and so many kids, it's shocking how many kids don't know what they're interested in.
Right.
They don't think about it. It's so weird.
If they haven't had exposure to certain things. Right, exactly. So if you start talking to them about what they're watching on Netflix, you can make some pretty good connections with a book that they're going to find interesting. There's obviously something out there for everyone. It's just a matter of figuring it out.
And helping them trudge through their hormone soup a lot of times to find it. 100%. I mean, that's some of the most reluctant kiddos become the most engaged. Yes. They just haven't found something that speaks to them, or they don't think that they're allowed to look at the things that already do speak to them, right? Like they feel somehow pushed out of, I love it. Yeah. I'm going to try a book buffet. I love that idea.
Yeah.
That is so fun.
It's fun.
I like bringing a lot of random crap into my class.
I'm all about like simple, like high impact for the least amount of energy.
Right.
And, it's one of those activities. It's like, well, I have this stuff around my house anyway.
Exactly. You just shop your house. Like,
shop your house. I have like plastic tablecloths somewhere for the kids, like just put them together. Yeah, and it's just little things like that though. I mean, it can make a big impact.
Oh, totally. Well, again, you said it before. It's novel. It's fun. Yes, it's refreshing.
Right.
It's the same thing for us. Yes. It doesn't matter what age a kiddo is. It's special and it's different. And that's all the reasons that I connected with you in the first place. And I knew that this would be the perfect moment for this series.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As you can tell, I love talking about this topic, books, writing, reading, all that stuff.
Let's talk about A Court of Thorns and Roses again.
Yes.
I'm dropping things over here. I'm so excited. Jenna, thank you so much for spending time with us here today and just letting me pick your brain and just sharing so much. It's wonderfully helpful and very inspirational to hear somebody who has been through real classroom things and still is so passionate about education.
Thank you.
A lot of what Amanda and I are trying to tap into as much as we can this season on the podcast is that renewed sense of, yes, this is why we're here. The passion is strong and it's hard. And also this is why we're here. So
exactly.
I appreciate you. Will you let our listeners...
for doing this.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Hey, we're kind of all just chipping away in the ways that we can.
That's right.
Will you let our listeners know where they can find you in all of the places?
Sure. Yes. You can find me at jennacopper.com. That's my website and blog. And you can also find me on Instagram at Dr. Jenna Copper.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm sure we will be having you back on the podcast again because this is your second time. Yeah, we got to do this again soon.
Is fun. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, friends, as you can tell, Jenna and I had quite a good time chit-chatting. We actually chatted for quite a while even after we stopped recording because we kind of just couldn't stop and we started giving each other book recommendations because that's just how the conversation goes when you get a couple of really enthusiastic fantasy readers together. If you're on Book Talk, you know what I'm talking about. So I want to say thank you again to Jenna. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of your amazing ideas and just energy with the podcast and with our listener audience. Next week, you're going to hear from another friend of the podcast and another member of the Keeping the Wonder team, Abby Gross. Amanda and Abby are going to talk about how Abby formats independent reading in her classroom. It's pretty different than the conversation that Jenna and I just had. And Abby has so many ideas and so many resources available as well. Cannot wait for you to hear that one. And that is coming up next week on the podcast. And we will see you there. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.